Hello. I don't know about you, but I get sort of exercised about what gets presented to me as reality. I get facts. There's plenty of facts floating around out there. And the thing is, you can uh, show facts in various lights with various dimensions, and all of a sudden, they're not the same thing. They're not as clear as they are when you just look at the pure fact. So there's a lot of bending, a lot of stretching, a lot of pushing a particular fact in a particular way. So now, I've considered myself almost my whole life as a moderate liberal. Now, it's hard to claim that with the current version of what liberal is, but that's what I always consider myself. And I was conservative about certain things, but the kind of things I was conservative about was things like, let's see, I don't have any tattoos. You know, years ago, having a tattoo wouldn't have been as common as it is today. I don't smoke illegal uh, products. Plenty of people did in my day. I don't have parties, get drunk. I don't drink at all. But so you might consider that conservative. But I would consider myself a liberal in the classic way, in that you don't judge other people as far as their essential worth goes. I mean, you can judge things like, I think you're an idiot for going to the bank teller, automatic teller at 12 o'clock at night, because the outcome of that was you got robbed. you know, so there's that kind of judgment. Or you're my neighbor's playing music at 3 o'clock in the morning outside, and that's really not very thoughtful. My judgment is that that's not a very thoughtful person. So we all have judgments. We do judge in some ways, but not in the judgment the way most people are concerned about. Hey, don't be judgmental. I wouldn't say I was, and I'm not. But while I think it's critical that while exposing ourselves to different viewpoints, well, the key is that you think critically, and maybe even be a little cynical, and that means you don't just take things at face value just because you hear it. It doesn't make it true. Now, you might hear it and let it pass right through you. You're not worried about it. It's not an issue for you. Just no issue of concern, so you don't get passionate about it. But there's a lot of things that we hear people tell us every day that, well, so what? Okay, so you say that. I can go with that. So I understand that people like to consume a narrative that makes them feel good. Okay, so if the narrative, you're going to consume narratives that makes you feel right, makes you feel safe, etc. All right, and when the world gets a little bit too crazy, you might be willing to listen to some narratives that you might not have been listening to, because it's just gotten too out of hand. So the status quo that you assumed before is no longer an acceptable status quo, or it doesn't exist. You thought it was a status quo, and it doesn't exist anymore. So, but unfortunately, a narrative can be, it can be complete fantasy. It can get, some people are just liars, but straight up. And others are just pasting together things that aren't quite true. So, not to use a fantasy, let me, as an example, or a story as an example. Well, the big bad wolf, the three little pigs' houses get blown down. The big bad wolf claims that, well, the reason he had to blow down those three houses is that there was some type of viral contamination, and those houses needed to be destroyed. And that all sounds good. That all sounds plausible. All sounds reasonable until you hear the three little pigs side of it. And it's a different story from the Three Little Pigs side. Okay, and the big red wolf, if he told that particular narrative that, hey, I was doing it to get rid of the viral contaminant, then you'd find that even if he could somehow, maybe he was doing something that looked like that, but you find out that no, he's just a liar he's essentially lying. It doesn't matter that he used some kind of product as he was blowing the house down that was a viral decontaminant. That was not his goal or the reason for what he was doing. Okay? He paints a narrative that isn't true by telling you it's about viral contamination. So that's what we're dealing with, is these just bending and shaping and pushing of certain facts in order to convince us of a narrative. So when we consume news, we have to look past the headlines, or the opinion of other people. Sometimes it's not headlines. Maybe we're watching a news show and they're giving pieces. Sometimes the newscaster who is supposed to be giving you actual news will give you an opinion, and that really aggravates me a lot. So we have to look beyond our preferred resources sometimes to really get to the truth of things. And we need to compare what is being said with what is actually happening, what is actually going on, what is the actual reality. And I see a failure of that with a lot of people. So when we consume news, we have to look past those headlines, etc. We can take one story, but we can't take one story that is somehow a related issue and conflate the facts of the certain facts to make it look like the whole world is dealing with this problem, when it maybe it's just a very local problem, a local issue. It may be a universal problem, like people are hungry or not able to make a living, or whatever. There's universal problems, but the fact is really a local fact, not a international or national or even statewide fact. It's something that's local, and it shouldn't be conflated. So we see a lot of that kind of stuff going on, that something that was actually a local phenomenon is pretended to be something that greater, wider, broader than what it actually is. So now, the narrative is built by repeating something over and over and over again, pretty much. Now, I don't like to, my personal preference is to give you information, and if you're probably following through this, I'm not going to repeat the same thing over and over and over again, okay? I just want to tell it to you straight, and you figure it out. But often there's a lot of speeches that are done where information within that speech is repeated over and over and over again. And the same thing with narrative. They repeat things over and over and over again. So we need to be aware that, why am I hearing the same thing over and over and over again? I can open up my computer, and I have Bing search. And when I do that, the MSN news feed pops up. I don't know what pops up on yours, but maybe you have something, that one or a similar one. And everything, there's nothing on there that is, it's all got one viewpoint. I mean, if it's talking about football, that's one thing. But if it's an article that has something to do with politics, social issues or whatnot, that kind of stuff, it's got one viewpoint at all times. It always tries to find something negative to pour on this side, okay? It's got a viewpoint. And so I don't believe anything it tells me headline-wise. And even if I read the stories, and I may occasionally read the stories, but the thing is, I look at enough different other things to know that this is just bogus stuff. These headlines are just to influence me and make me feel a particular way. And unfortunately, most of us, all we ever see is the headlines. We don't read the articles. You got other things to do in the day. You got to play your games on your videos. So anyway, so that's a problem. So what's happening with narratives? Well, let's start with White House. So, because look, the Trump White House is been going. They're relentless. They've been going gangbusters creating narrative. So, for example, the first day of Trump's administration, he could assign 2,000 executive orders on that day, and he didn't, because the purpose of him not signing them all on that day is he wanted to just repeatedly, over and over, be doing something different, 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 different. Here's a new, a new, a new, and therefore he's busy. Okay, he is busy working for America, right? So there's other presidents who have signed 100 on the first day, 150 on the first day. I don't know. You've heard that before. They're doing something. They've done something. They've made changes. But the thing is, that only lasted one newscast, right? Maybe it was repeated by the newscasters a few days. But Trump, you see, the White House, they are manipulating it and doing another one and another one and another one and another one. And everybody is getting the understanding that Trump is getting things done. And if you agree with him, he is getting things done. If you disagree with him, Trump is tearing the country apart. Right? I mean, it depends on which side you're on that issue. So, and then talking about tariffs. Now, we just a few days ago, we had April 2nd, which was Independence Day or Liberation Day. Liberation Day, I think it was. Now, Trump has been, if you just been paying attention to things. I'm just looking at YouTube, y'all. I got stuff popping up on YouTube. I can select. I can either watch a gardening video or a video about people who are kind to animals, or I can watch a video about sports, or I can watch a video about news-oriented stuff like Trump. So I can watch the Trump news conference or whatnot, right? The whole thing. I don't have to watch CBS News or Fox News to get that. I can watch it straight myself. I don't need anybody telling me anything. I can listen to him. Now, then I get to make my own mind up about whether he's telling me something that's true or not true, etc. But there's no filter. No one is creating a narrative for me except for Trump himself. Okay. But, and I get to decide whether I believe his narrative or not. But, so you had this Liberation Day. Well, he's been talking about tariffs for weeks. He's been essentially saying, actually, if you ever have listened to Trump, there's nothing new with Trump. He's been talking about the same things forever. But, just go back in time. In fact, they've got videos of Trump back in the 80s talking about some of the things he's doing today. Nothing new, same thing. But particularly for the narrative purpose, Trump, previous weeks has been talking about, hey, we're gonna do tariffs. They're gonna be reciprocal tariffs. They're gonna be done for this reason or that reason. They're not gonna hurt anybody. Yada yada yada. Well, so by the time Liberation Day came, frankly, all he had to do is put out a news release and say, Liberation Day's here, right? The press secretary could have done that. But let's have another event, make it a big deal. Make it news, build the narrative. And of course, another narrative that they're building is the reduction of government narrative. It's the same thing. They've been talking about it forever. And they could have come in and, Musk could be working in the background, doing things. You would never see Musk, it's possible, because he's not the one that actually signs the papers on anything. He's just running the team. It's the Secretary of State or whoever who signs the papers, who says we're getting rid of this, that, or the other. That's Marco Rubio, I think. So, and other department heads like that, other secretaries would be signing the papers. So he could be in the background. You wouldn't even know Elon Musk existed. But they've got him out there right in your face constantly talking about cutting this, cutting that, how this is too much, how that is too much, etc. Because they're building a narrative about Trump is cutting the government. Now, the same thing could get done without making the narrative. And someone might pick up on it and make a narrative themselves. But the point is he's the one making the narrative. The White House is making the narrative. So, of course, there's opposing views. Is this all smoke and mirrors that we're been looking at from the White House? So the question is, are we getting honest information, or are we getting facts that are distorted against by this kind of a shell of a narrative? You get the facts, you cram them in the narrative shell, right? Is that what's going on? Now, on the other side of things, you have, for example, just what happened this past weekend, talking about narrative. You had Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, and I was watching her, and in her presentation, she said, "Look, it's April the 5th. There have been over 3,000 demonstrations, 1,300. I'm sorry, it was 1,300. Over 1,300 demonstrations against the Trump administration all across the United States." And well, that's that's newsworthy, and it's certainly a feather in the cap of people who organized that. We've been, of course, it's doing the same thing we've been doing for parties. What do you call it? A rave? There's a word for it. For when young people all text in, "Hey, we're going to get together at the warehouse down by the railroad track and have a disco party, a rave tonight at 7 o'clock," and then 2,000 young people show up and have the party, or they'll do other kind of you've seen them. They'll do all get together and do some dance in downtown Minneapolis or whatnot, just out of nowhere. We're going to meet at a certain time. We're going to do this dance, whatever it is. The Chinese, just in of recent months, the Chinese had a thing where the young people were going online and saying, "Okay, we're going to get together at the Bing Bong Ice Cream Palace in Beijing at 9 o'clock tonight," and they would have like many thousands of Chinese ride their bicycles into town. And, just fill up the town with all these kids. They weren't doing anything bad. They weren't disrupting, but the Chinese government doesn't want people congregating like that, and they shut that down. So, which was interesting. But anyway, so politically, they're using the same thing. Okay, the Democrats use the same thing. So we have this big, this 1,300, 1,300 demonstrations across the United States. Now, what I thought was rather interesting is that she showed a map, and she showed a map of all the 1,300 across the United States. Now and they put a circle for each one. Now, these circles were big enough probably to cover Connecticut. If you had one in Providence, at Rhode Island, well, it covered the whole state, right? These circles could have easily been just big enough to cover like Metro Atlanta, something about that round, or any other metro area, right? The immediate metro area, the not all the suburbs around it, immediate, something where people would easily travel to this event, and we would have seen it on the map. But these circles were probably 4 or 5 times bigger than they needed to be, at least 2 or 3 easily. They were ridiculously big. And the whole purpose, clearly, was to fill up the whole map with red dots so that you hardly saw anything. So they were having demonstrations were so big that they covered the, deserts and mountains and everything else, which obviously they weren't having any demonstration on top of a mountain out in the Rockies, right? They might have been having it in Denver or Fort Collins, etc., right? Anyway, it was obviously to create a narrative that the whole country is blanketed with people. Now, and then they showed us an image of the crowd at Copley Square in Boston. And Copley Square is a big, wide open space, easy for thousands of people to gather there. And, they had to deal with that. And then that's impressive. But they really didn't talk about anything about the size of this other than look at Copley Square. Wow, look. 20,000 people, 30,000, however, whatever it was, 50,000, I don't know. Now, that would lead you to believe, therefore, that, oh, there were 50,000 people in every demonstration all the way across the state, across the United States. Well, maybe there were, but I pretty much doubt that. And I thought it was very interesting that the next day, my wife and I are going over to the coast to eat at a restaurant on the beach. And as we're approaching the restaurant along the road, there at an intersection is a dozen, 15 people with their signs. Now, maybe these were people who had their signs left over from yesterday's demonstration, wherever they were having it. That was only 12 or 15 people. So that means that it's quite possible that it was only those 12. Maybe they were half of the people who met for the demonstration the day before, or maybe they were a tenth of the people. Okay, maybe there were 100 people at the demonstration. Well, that's way different than 50,000 or 20,000 or 30,000, whatever. So these dots across the United States might not have been more than 10 people at some of them, because they signed up, I guess. I am not involved in how that worked, but I'm sure they signed in somehow to say, we're meeting at so-and-so, okay? On top of that, we drove to lunch, ate lunch, and we came back, and they weren't there anymore. Now, once again, did they go home? Did they only have a stomach for an hour worth of or 2 hours worth of standing out in the sun? Or did they go to another place because they thought, well, we're going to go to several intersections? Maybe that's what they did. It still was only a dozen or so people. And that's way different than 20,000 people. But the narrative that was clearly being made by Rachel Maddow was that there were just hundreds of thousands of people across the United States that were against the administration. Well, there probably are hundreds of thousands of people. You know, God, not everybody went to the demonstrations. But they also throw in there a little spice. Well, there are Republicans who are also angry at Trump for his tariff stuff. Well, you know, I don't know hardly anyone who's ever been elected who never had anybody decide, hey, I really don't like the direction that guy's going. I don't know why the people, you know, some people clearly voted for Trump, not because they liked all his policies, but they just thought he was the better choice. That's all. They didn't like the other choice. They weren't 100% believers in MAGA people. They were just people who were Republicans who voted. I always voted Republican. I'll vote again. Just like there are Democrats who do the same thing. And of course, they may well be upset. But that's not telling me anything. It does, you know, and there's clearly a few Republicans in the Congress who are anti-Trump, and that was even before the election. So to announce that there's some congressman who isn't happy with Trump, is just meaningless. It's just trying to convince me of something that they want me to go. They want to paint this narrative, and so that aggravates me. And it should aggravate you too, I believe. Let's see here. So, now, what was interesting after this Maddow thing, but then I also saw videos of people who were at some of these demonstrations. And there were several that I saw where there were like sort of man-on-the-street interviews, okay? The interviewer would walk up to somebody in the crowd, not state that they had a particular viewpoint. They just come up and say, so what are you doing here? Well, I'm here to protest. So what are you protesting? Well, I'm protesting Trump. So what is it that you don't like? And one guy, he asked, well, what's the problem? And basically this guy just regurgitated. And this is what's sad, is that I'm always, on these things, you're always seeing people, they're not giving you any thoughtful, fact-based stuff. They're just regurgitating the same factless stuff. Here's a fact. Or they assume it's a fact. Sometimes it's just an opinion of a news reporter, you know, or a commentator. It's not real. It doesn't have any truth behind it. But anyway, so in this case, there was a they spoke to the guy and he said, so what are you here about? He says, I'm here because I'm really upset that Trump has gotten rid of the USAID, USAID. And so the interviewer said, so what is USAID? And the guy said, well, it is, and I'll just paraphrase, but it's a basic thing that you probably agree with, as I would have agreed with too, up until very recently. He said, it's a program where the different countries get their share. Like this is a done deal. This is in concrete. Their share of money to help them take care of their poor, to feed their poor, and to get provide medical help for their poor. That's the reason for USAID. Now, you probably agree with that, or you once agreed with that. That is what it was created for. And certainly when Kennedy created it, it was that way. And for years, it was that way. Okay. And I would have assumed that's what it is 3 months ago. Okay. Now, so, but the thing is, we know that that's not what's going on exactly. Now, if you don't know it, you just need to go look up some information. For example, here we are. I'll read this off. So this is White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt highlighted four. This is from the first day or so that they were doing this. Highlighted four of what four that she said were emblematic of the waste and abuse that has run through USAID over the past several years. Not forever, just over the last several years. And she gave just four. These are just four, but there were a pile. I've seen a lot more. 1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces. 70,000 for production of a DEI musical in Ireland as a musical. 47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. 32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. Now, okay, you may think that those are worthy projects. Okay, and I'm not going to even bother to argue with you about that. The question is that what USAID was created for? And in fact, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just regurgitating stuff because he would have known that one of the things that he was supporting were these DEI projects, these transgender projects. He would have stood up for those. No, he didn't even define USAID as these things. You see? Because he's been bamboozled. That's what it used to be. That's what people continue to say it is. Nobody who's supporting the people who their narrative isn't that, oh yeah, of course it's about DEI. So what we're doing is we're not feeding and healing the poor. None of these do feed and heal the poor. What we're doing is we're promoting our own culture across the world. Now, most of us have a problem with the history of how the Americas were created by the Europeans coming over here and obliterating different cultures. I mean, that's a theme that we hear. There's a narrative. It's really more complicated than that, but that is a narrative and it has some merit. And wherever that has happened, most of the people who are looking at this, I'm pretty sure, is going to say, yeah, that wasn't right. They shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't have obliterated that other culture. Okay? Of course, we won't get into the fact that it's quite possible that we brought disease and whatnot with it. The people from Europe brought disease with them, and that's what wiped out the culture. But, but if the disease hadn't happened, I'm sure you would have seen some pretty more war and stuff than actually happened, right? There have been more people to fight, more people to overtake. That's the history of humanity around the world. But, so, it's not right to push our culture on other countries. USAID shouldn't be, do you agree? USAID shouldn't be pushing our culture for, hey, go transgender, go DEI, okay? That's our American fight right now, or has been the last few years. Is that fair, right, true, etc. But we shouldn't be promoting it. Why should, and if you agree with it and believe in it, that's okay. If you want to go to some nonprofit organization and give money, give part of $70 million for a musical in $70,000 for a musical in Ireland, that's fine. It's just not really right, maybe, to take other people's money who don't agree with that, who have paid their taxes, thinking that they were building roads, they were helping with education, they were helping the military get their pay and medical, etc., and find out, oh no, that's not what my money's going for. My money's going to help somebody do some musical in Ireland, or a comic book in Peru, or an opera in Colombia. Okay, so my point simply is, this guy, who I'm sure had a good heart, or I'll assume, I can't be sure, but I assume he had a good heart. He was passionate to help others. He saw injustice. I get it. I've been there. I can tell my own stories. Okay, so the question for me is always, can I trust the facts being thrown at me, or are they simply a patchwork of points that are sewn together to mislead me? I don't expect transparency all the time, and I can stomach a little bit of short-term misdirection, but I do expect reality to be supported and not a false picture painted, for my consumption. And how about you? Because I end all of these things. I care about truth. That's why I'm talking. That's why I'm sharing. And if you care about truth, you really care about truth, then I suggest you pray to your Creator, our Creator, and ask Him to show you the truth. And I'm confident He will. Have a good day.